The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched upward like a cathedral of light, its crystalline walls reflecting the gathered representatives of 1,000 worlds. And at its center stood an old alien who had come to deliver a warning that would save them all. If only they would listen. Kethur was ancient by any measure, his pale gray skin hanging loose on his skeletal frame, his 4 eyes clouded with age and something else, something darker. And his hands trembled as he gripped a speaking podium before him. He had once been Commander Kethur of the Valorian Imperial Fleet, leader of the greatest armada his species had ever assembled, conqueror of 40 worlds. And now he was simply a forgotten relic standing before leaders who saw him as nothing more than a madman. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, he began, his voice cracking with emotion. I come before you today not as a warrior seeking glory, but as a survivor begging you to hear the truth before it is too late. Councillor Drenth of the Calorian Dominion leaned back in his elevated seat and made a sound of amusement, his blue scales shimmering under the lights as he exchanged knowing glances with his allies. The esteemed veteran speaks of truth, Drenth announced loudly enough for all to hear. Yet his own people confined him to a medical facility for the instability of his mind. Perhaps we should question what version of truth he offers us today. Laughter rippled through sections of the chamber. But Kethur did not waver, for he had expected this reception, and he had prepared himself for their mockery. 40 cycles ago, Kethur continued, raising his voice above the murmurs, the Valorian Empire discovered a small blue planet on the outer edge of the spiral arm, a world called Earth by its inhabitants, a world we believed would fall to our forces within days. He paused and let his clouded eyes sweep across the chamber, remembering the confidence he had felt as a young commander, the absolute certainty that his fleet would crush the primitive creatures who dared to resist. We sent 300 warships to conquer them, the largest invasion force our empire had ever assembled, and I led them personally, eager to add another world to our domain. The chamber had grown quieter now, for even those who dismissed Kethur as insane could not deny the historical record of what had happened to the Valorian Empire, an empire that had simply ceased to exist within a generation. The humans had no fleet to speak of, Kethur said, his voice dropping to something almost like reverence. They had mining vessels and cargo ships, and a handful of patrol craft armed with weapons we considered laughable. They had no allies, no experience in galactic warfare, no reason to believe they could survive against us. He closed his 4 eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they glistened with tears that had taken 40 cycles to shed. We expected surrender within hours. Instead, we found something that haunts me to this day. Councillor Drenth shifted in his seat, his amusement fading slightly as he noticed that even his allies had stopped laughing, drawn in by the old veteran's intensity. Their commander was a human named Daniel Morrison, Kethur said, speaking the name like a prayer or perhaps a curse. He was unremarkable by any physical measure, smaller than most species, weaker, slower, with a lifespan so brief it seemed almost cruel. Yet when he appeared on our communication screens and we demanded his surrender, he smiled at us. Kethur's voice cracked with emotion as he remembered that smile, a smile that had no right to exist on the face of someone facing certain death. He told us that Earth would not surrender today, or tomorrow, or ever. He told us that we were welcome to try taking his world, but he warned us that the cost would be higher than we could imagine. The old veteran gripped the podium harder, his gray knuckles turning white with the pressure. We laughed at him, just as you laugh at me now. We called him primitive, foolish, suicidal, and then we began our invasion. He turned slowly, making sure every representative in that vast chamber could see his face, could see the truth written in his ancient features. The humans turned their mining vessels into weapons, ramming our warships with loads of explosive ore. They crashed their cargo ships into our troop transports, They fought us in the streets of their cities, in the corridors of their buildings, in the tunnels beneath their earth. His voice rose with each word, carrying the weight of memories that had broken him. They did not retreat. When we killed their soldiers, they came back with more. They did not surrender when we bombed their cities. They dug deeper and kept fighting. They did not break when we thought we had won. They simply waited and struck again. Kethur's whole body was shaking now, and the chamber had fallen completely. Silent, Daniel Morrison led a counterattack with nothing but mining vessels filled with explosives. He flew directly into the heart of my fleet and destroyed 3 of our greatest warships, including my own flagship. I escaped in a damaged shuttle and watched as humans in nothing but basic spacesuits boarded our crippled vessels and fought my soldiers hand to hand. He pointed a trembling finger at Counselor Drenth, who had stopped smiling entirely. You call them primitive because they lack our technology. You dismiss them because they are new to the stars. You see their small bodies and short lives and assume they are weak. Kethur slammed his fist on the podium with surprising force for one so frail. The Lorian Empire no longer exists because we made the same mistake. 300 warships reduced to wreckage, an empire of conquest, brought to its knees by creatures we considered beneath us. Guards began moving toward the podium, summoned by nervous council members who did not want to hear more. But Kethur kept speaking, even as they approached. Humans do not surrender. They do not break. They do not stop fighting until either they are dead or you are. And when you hurt them, when you kill their families and their children, they become something else entirely. The guards reached him and took hold of his arms. But the old veteran screamed his final warning as they dragged him away from the podium. Do not provoke them. Do not threaten them. Do not give them reason to remember that they are the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever seen. Counselor Drenth stood and waved dismissively as Kethur was removed from the chamber. The ravings of a broken mind. He announced to the assembled representatives, "The humans are nothing, primitive creatures barely capable of reaching their own moon. We have nothing to fear from such insignificant beings." The council murmured in agreement, eager to forget the uncomfortable words of the mad veteran. And within minutes, the session continued as if nothing had happened, but as Kethur was taken to a medical facility for evaluation, he whispered one final truth to the guards who held him. "When they come for you, and they will come, remember that I tried to save you all." The guards did not listen, just as the council had not listened, and Kethur wept for the doom he knew was approaching, a doom that would make his own people's fate seem merciful by comparison. 6 months had passed since the mad veteran was dragged from the council chamber, and the galaxy had forgotten his warnings as easily as they had forgotten his name. But fate has a way of reminding the arrogant of lessons they refuse to learn. The Calorian patrol fleet detected the vessel on a routine sweep near the border of their territory, a large ship drifting slowly through space, its hull scarred and battered, its engines running at minimal power. "Identify the vessel," Counselor Drenth commanded from his flagship, for he had personally led this patrol in search of glory and opportunity. His tactical officer studied the readings with growing interest before turning to face the counselor. "It appears to be a colony ship of human origin. My lord, our scans indicate approximately 3,000 life signs aboard, mostly civilians based on their biosignatures." Drenth felt a smile spread across his scaled face as he considered the possibilities before him. 3,000 humans, helpless and alone, far from their territory and any hope of rescue. "Open communication channels," he ordered, already imagining the recognition he would receive when he returned to the council with such a prize. The main view screen flickered to life, and revealed a human woman standing on what appeared to be a damaged bridge. Her dark hair pulled back from a face marked with exhaustion and worry. "This is Captain Laura Bennett of the colony ship Horizon's Dream," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had been through difficult times. "We are refugees from the Kepler colony. Our world suffered a catastrophic environmental collapse, and we had no choice but to evacuate." She paused and seemed to gather herself before continuing. "We have limited supplies, and our ship has sustained significant damage during our journey. We request assistance and safe passage through your territory. We mean no harm to anyone and carry only civilians seeking a new home." Drenth muted the communication and turned to his officers with barely contained amusement. 3,000 primitives, stranded and helpless, begging us for mercy. This is an opportunity that fate has placed directly in my path. His second in command, a younger Calorian named Vethris, shifted uncomfortably before speaking. "My lord, the Council has no formal conflict with the humans. Taking their civilians as prisoners could create diplomatic complications." Drenth dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. "The humans have no real power in the galactic community. They are scattered colonies with no unified government. By the time anyone objects, these prisoners will have already proven useful to our research divisions." He unmuted the channel and addressed Captain Bennett with a cold smile. "Human vessel, you have entered Calorian space without authorization. Your ship and all passengers are hereby claimed as property of the Calorian Dominion. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded." Laura Bennett's expression shifted from hope to something harder, something that a wiser being might have recognized as dangerous. "Counselor, we are refugees, families, children, elderly. We have no military value and pose no threat to your dominion. I am asking you, one leader to another, to show mercy." Drenth laughed openly at her plea. "Mercy is for the strong to grant and the weak to beg for. You are weak, human, and I have no interest in your pleas. You have 1 hour to prepare your people for boarding. If you resist in any way, we will destroy your vessel and everyone aboard." He cut the communication and leaned back in his command chair, savoring the fear he had seen in the human's eyes inside the Horizon's Dream. Laura Bennett stood motionless for a long moment after the screen went dark, her mind racing through options that seemed to narrow with every passing second. "Captain," her first officer said quietly, "what do we do? We cannot fight a Calorian battle fleet." Laura turned and looked at her bridge crew, men and women who had trusted her to lead them to safety, who had survived the death of their home world, only to face this new horror. "Gather the senior staff in the cargo bay," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her, "and find Henry Cole. I need to speak with him immediately." 20 minutes later, Laura stood before a small group of her most trusted people in the largest cargo hold of the ship. Around her stood families huddled together, children crying softly, elderly passengers trying to comfort the young Henry. Cole pushed through the crowd to reach her. He was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in military service before retiring to the quiet life of a colony farmer. "Captain Bennett," he said with a respectful nod. "I assume our situation is bad as the rumors suggest." Laura nodded grimly and raised her voice so that everyone in the hold could hear. "The Calorian Dominion has demanded our surrender. They intend to take us as prisoners. And based on what we know of their practices, that means slavery, experimentation, or worse." Frightened murmurs rippled through the crowd. But Laura pressed on. "We have 1 hour before they board us. We cannot outrun them, and we cannot outfight them in any conventional sense, which leaves us with a choice." She looked at Henry Cole, at the young engineer Sophie Grant, who stood nearby with grease on her hands and determination in her eyes. at all the faces watching her with desperate hope. We can surrender and hope for mercy from beings who have already shown us they have none. Or we can fight, knowing that we will probably die, but die free and on our own terms. The cargo hold fell silent as her words sank in. And then Henry Cole stepped forward with a grim smile. I did not survive the collapse of our world to become a slave, he said loudly enough for all to hear. If we are going to die today, then let us make sure these Calorians remember the cost of threatening human families. Sophie Grant moved to stand beside him. I can turn this ship into something they will not expect. Give me access to the engineering systems, and I will make them regret ever finding us. One by one, others stepped forward, parents clutching their children, elderly men and women with fire in their eyes, young people barely old enough to understand what they were. Volunteering for Laura felt tears, threatening to fall, but she held them back and smiled at her. People with fierce pride. Then we fight, not because we think we can win, but because surrender was never really an option for us. She turned to her communication officer with final instructions. When the battle begins, I want you to transmit everything that happens, every moment, every sacrifice, every act of courage. Send it across every frequency you can reach. The officer nodded with understanding. If we are going to die, the galaxy will know why. Laura placed her hand on his shoulder and spoke the words that would define their final hours. They will call us fools for fighting. Let them. But they will never call us cowards. And they will never forget what humans do when you leave them no choice but war. The hour began counting down. And aboard the Horizon's Dream, 3,000 humans prepared to show the galaxy exactly what Kethur had tried to warn them about. The hour passed too quickly, and yet somehow not quickly enough. And when the Calorian boarding shuttles launched from their warships, the crew of the Horizon's Dream watched them approach with hearts full of fear and determination in equal measure. Counselor Drenth had observed the operation from his command chair with the confidence of someone who had never truly been challenged, never truly understood that the universe contained forces beyond his comprehension. Report the status of the human vessel, he commanded lazily. No change. My lord, their engines remain at minimal power, and we detect no weapon signatures. They appear to have accepted their fate. Drenth smiled and imagined the praise he would receive. The advancement in rank, the power that would come from delivering 3,000 human specimens to the Dominion's research facilities. Excellent. Inform the boarding parties that I want the ship's captain. Brought to me personally, I wish to see the face of human desperation up close. The first shuttle locked onto the Horizon's Dream's main airlock, and 20 Calorian soldiers prepared to board what they expected to be a vessel full of terrified civilians. They were very wrong. The airlock doors opened, and the lead soldiers stepped inside, their weapons raised and their training making them cautious despite their confidence. The corridor ahead was dark, the emergency lighting casting everything in a dim red glow. Advance slowly, the squad leader ordered. Clear each section before moving forward. They moved deeper into the ship, finding it strangely empty. The corridor silent except for the hum of damaged systems and the distant sound of something they could not identify. The first trap triggered. When the squad reached the junction point between corridors, the floor beneath them suddenly gave way, dropping 3 soldiers into a cargo hold that had been filled with industrial chemicals. Their screams echoed through the communication channel as the corrosive substances did their terrible work, and the remaining soldiers scrambled back in shock and confusion. What is happening? Drenth demanded from his flagship as he watched the chaos unfold through the helmet cameras of his soldiers. Before anyone could answer, the second wave of boarding parties reported similar disasters, airlocks that vented atmosphere once soldiers were inside, maintenance drones that had been rigged with explosives and sent flying toward enemy squads. Corridors that collapsed without warning and trapped Calorian forces in darkness, deep in the heart of the ship. Sophie Grant worked her console with frantic precision, her fingers dancing across controls she had modified during that precious hour of preparation. Section 7 airlock is cycling, she announced over the internal channel. I have 15 enemies trapped, venting atmosphere now. Beside her, a teenager named Marcus helped monitor the ship's systems, his young face pale but determined as he tracked enemy movements and relayed information to the defense teams. There are more coming through the port side, he reported. At least 30 soldiers heading toward the residential section. Sophie acknowledged him and opened a channel to Henry Cole. Henry, you have incoming on deck for 30+ hostiles approaching the family quarters. Henry's voice came back steady and calm despite the sounds of combat in the background. Understood. We are ready for them. He stood at the end of a corridor with 20 civilians armed with tools, kitchen knives, and a few weapons they had taken from fallen Calorian soldiers behind him. Hundreds of families huddled in the residential section, parents holding their children and elderly passengers preparing to fight if the line broke the Calorian. Soldiers rounded the corner, expecting easy prey, and found instead a wall of humans who refused to move for our families, Henry shouted. And the humans charged. The battle in that corridor was brutal and brief and terrible. Humans fell under Calorian weapons, but more took their places, clawing and stabbing and fighting with a ferocity that shocked the soldiers who faced them. An elderly woman named Grace tackled a Calorian twice her size and drove a kitchen knife into the gap in his armor. A father named Paul used his own body as a shield to protect the barricade behind him, taking multiple shots before he finally collapsed. A teenage girl, whose name was never recorded, picked up a fallen soldier's weapon and kept firing until her last breath. When the smoke cleared, the corridor was filled with bodies, both human and Calorian, and the enemy advance had been stopped, at least for now, on the bridge. Laura Bennett coordinated the defense with a calm that seemed impossible under the circumstances, her voice never wavering, even as reports of casualties came flooding in. Sophie, I need you to target their communication frequencies. Jam everything you can. Already working on it. Captain, Laura turned to her communication officer. Is the transmission going out? He nodded with grim satisfaction. Every moment of this is being broadcast on every frequency we can reach. Someone out there is watching. Explosion rocked the ship, and alarms began screaming warnings about hull breaches and failing systems. But Laura stayed at her post and kept giving orders on his flagship. Counselor Drenth watched his forces being slaughtered by civilians and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. How is this possible? He demanded, his scales flushing dark with anger and confusion. They are unarmed colonists, women and children and old people. How are they doing this? His tactical officer had no answer because there was no answer that made sense. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned and should have surrendered. The moment the first shots were fired, instead, they fought like demons from ancient legends, turning every corridor into a death trap, sacrificing themselves without hesitation to take down enemy soldiers, refusing to break no matter how many of them fell. My lord, Vethris said quietly, we have lost 200 soldiers. The human ship has suffered critical damage, but they continue to resist. Perhaps we should withdraw and simply destroy the vessel from range. Drenth was about to agree when a new alert sounded on the bridge. Counselor, there is activity on the human ship's bridge. We are detecting an energy buildup near their reactor core. Laura Bennett appeared on the view screen one final time, her face bloody from a wound on her forehead, her bridge filled with smoke and damaged equipment, but her eyes still burning with defiance. Counselor Drenth, she said with a smile that made his blood run cold. You wanted to see the face of human desperation. Look carefully, because this is not desperation. She gestured to the strike team that had just breached a bridge. Calorian soldiers who stood frozen by her words. This is what humans do when you threaten our families. This is what we become when you leave us no choice. She reached for a control panel that was flashing red with warning lights. Remember us. Remember what we chose. And remember that we are not the last. The transmission cut off just as Lara triggered the explosive charges she had hidden throughout the bridge. The detonation killed her instantly along with the entire strike team. And the chain reaction spread through the ship's damaged systems. Sophie had one final task to complete before the end. She initiated the reactor overload sequence and sent the distress signal carrying every recording. Every moment of the battle, every act of courage and sacrifice, the Horizon's Dream exploded in a ball of fire that consumed 2 Calorian frigates that had gotten too close. And 3,000 humans ceased to exist in a flash of light that would be remembered forever. But the signal was already racing across space, carrying the truth to anyone who would listen. And somewhere in the galaxy, humans were listening. Drenth stared at the wreckage where his easy victory should have been. Surrounded by the debris of ships and the ghosts of soldiers who had underestimated their enemy. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself, finally understanding the warning of the mad veteran he had dismissed. But understanding had come too late. And the price for his arrogance was already being calculated by forces he could not imagine. The signal traveled faster than anyone expected, bouncing from relay station to relay station, spreading across the communication networks of 100 worlds before anyone could stop it. And within days, the galaxy knew what had happened to the Horizon's Dream on Earth. The transmission arrived in the middle of the night at the United Coalition Command Center, and the officer on duty watched in growing horror as the recordings played across his screen. He saw the Calorian fleet surrounding the colony ship. He heard Captain Lara Bennett plead for mercy and receive only threats in return. He watched as 3,000 civilians armed themselves with tools and kitchen knives and prepared to die rather than surrender by morning. Every human colony had received the transmission, and by evening, something that had never happened before was happening. Humanity was speaking with one voice. The scattered colonies that had always operated independently, the governments that had never agreed on anything, the military forces that had competed rather than cooperated, all of them fell silent as they watched the final moments of the Horizon's Dream. They watched Henry Cole lead elderly men and young fathers into battle against armored soldiers, fighting with nothing but determination and love for the families behind them. They watched Sophie Grant turn the ship into a weapon, sacrificing herself without hesitation to take as many enemies as possible with her. They watched Lara Bennett smile as she triggered the detonation that ended her life, choosing death over submission with a courage that made grown soldiers weep. Then they watched the names scroll across the screen. 3,000 names. 3,000 human beings who had died because a Calorian counselor wanted glory and had seen them as nothing more than primitives to be enslaved. The United Human Coalition had always been a loose alliance, more symbol than substance. But in the hours after the transmission spread, representatives from every colony gathered in emergency session and voted unanimously for something that had never been done before. War Admiral George Dawson received the news while standing in his daughter's empty room on the colony world of New Portland. Emma had been 23 years old, recently married, traveling to Earth on the Horizon's Dream to visit her grandmother when the Calorians found them. He held her picture in his hands as his aide delivered the message. And when he looked up, his eyes held something that made the young officer step back in fear. "The Coalition has authorized military action," the aide reported quietly. "You have been given command of the response fleet. We depart in 72 hours. Dawson nodded slowly and set his daughters' picture carefully back on her desk. Tell the fleet commanders to prepare for departure, and tell them we are naming the flagship after the captain of the Horizon's Dream. At the Galactic Council, the reaction was very different. Panic spread through the chamber as representatives realized what the humans were preparing to do. And accusations flew in every direction. Counselor Drenth tried to defend himself, claiming that the humans had attacked first, that the recordings had been fabricated, that he had acted within his authority to protect Calorian interests. But the recordings were clear and unedited, and every species with eyes could see the truth. A colony ship full of refugees had asked for help and been threatened with enslavement, and they had chosen to die fighting rather than submit. Representatives who had always dismissed humans as primitive suddenly remembered uncomfortable facts. Humans had conquered their own death world, surviving ice ages and plagues and countless disasters that would have ended lesser species. Humans had split the atom and walked on their moon within a single generation of discovering flight. They had spread to the stars despite having no guidance from older civilizations, and now, for the first time in their history, humans were angry. Someone on the council remembered the mad veteran Kethur was retrieved from his medical facility and brought before the council for the second time. But now the atmosphere was completely different. The representatives who had laughed at him now watched him with fear in their eyes. He walked slowly to the speaking podium, older and more frail than before, but there was no triumph in his expression, only sadness. You finally wish to listen, he said quietly. Unfortunately, listening now will not save you from what is coming. Counselor Drenth stood and pointed an accusing claw at the old veteran. This creature is responsible for the fear spreading through the council. His stories poisoned our judgment and created unnecessary panic. Kethur looked at the counselor who had dismissed him, who had mocked him, who had then gone on to murder 3,000 humans and trigger exactly the nightmare he had warned against. I told you not to provoke them, Kethur said simply. I told you that humans do not surrender. I told you what happens when you threaten their families. He turned to face the full council and spoke with the way of someone who had seen horrors beyond imagination. 40 cycles ago, my fleet invaded Earth, 300 warships against a planet that had barely achieved space travel. We thought it would be simple. His voice grew heavy with memory as he continued. The humans had no fleet, no advanced weapons, no experience in galactic warfare. They should have surrendered within hours. Instead, they fought us for 18 months. Gasps echoed through the chamber as representatives tried to comprehend what he was describing. They turned mining ships into missiles and flew them directly into our warships. They boarded our vessels in nothing but basic spacesuits and fought our soldiers hand to hand. They kept fighting, even when we destroyed their cities, even when we killed millions of them, even when they had no hope of victory. Kethur's eyes filled with tears as he remembered Commander Daniel Morrison and all the humans who had taught him the true meaning of determination. We killed 10 million of them before they finally drove us away. 10 million. Humans who chose death over submission, and when we retreated, they followed us. He let that sink in before delivering the final truth. The Valorian Empire no longer exists because we made the same mistake you have made. We threatened human families and we killed human children. And they did not stop until every one of our worlds had burned. The chamber fell completely silent as representatives processed his words. The humans are not coming for territory, Kethur said, looking directly at Drenth. They are not coming for resources or political advantage. They are coming because you killed 3,000 of their people, including children, and they will not stop until justice is served. He turned away from the podium and began walking toward the exit. pausing only to deliver one final warning. I tried to save you. I begged you to listen. But you were too arrogant to hear the truth. He looked back at the council one last time, his ancient face filled with something like pity. When the human fleet arrives, remember that this could have been avoided. Remember that 3,000 refugees asked for mercy and received none. Remember that everything that happens next is the consequence of your contempt. He walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a council paralyzed by fear and a Calorian counselor who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Somewhere in human space, warships were gathering, crews were training, and a fleet was preparing to deliver a message that would echo through galactic history. The humans were coming, and this time, there would be no mercy. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Calorian territory on a cold morning that would be remembered for 1,000 generations. 40 warships against an empire that commanded 200. Odds that should have guaranteed human defeat. Admiral George Dawson stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Lavra Bennett, and looked out at the enemy fleet assembled before him. The Calorians had gathered everything they had, confident that superior numbers would crush the primitive humans who dared to challenge them. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, enemy fleet is moving into defensive formation. They outnumber us 5-1. Dawson nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the view screen where Calorian warships filled the darkness of space like a wall of scales and steel. Open a channel to the enemy fleet. I want every ship to hear what I have to say. The communication officer worked his console and nodded when the channel was open. And Dawson stepped forward to address the beings who had murdered his daughter and 3,000 innocent people. Calorian fleet. This is Admiral George Dawson of the United Human Coalition. 3 months ago, your counselor attacked a colony ship carrying refugees, families, children seeking safety. When they asked for mercy, he threatened them with enslavement. His voice remained steady despite the rage burning inside him. Those people chose to die rather than surrender. They fought your soldiers with kitchen knives and tools. They turned their ship into a weapon and took as many of your people with them as they could. And before they died, they made sure the galaxy would know the truth. He paused and let his words sink in before continuing. I'm here today because my daughter was on that ship. She was 23 years old, newly married, traveling to visit her grandmother. She died because your counselor wanted glory and saw humans as nothing more than primitives to be enslaved. The bridge crew watched their admiral with quiet pride as he delivered his message. We did not come here for territory. We did not come for resources or political advantage. We came here for justice. And we will not leave until justice is served. On the Calorian flagship, Counselor Drenth listened to the human's words with growing fear. He had expected threats and bluster. Not this cold determination. Not this absolute certainty. Destroy them, he ordered frantically. All ships engage. Overwhelm them with superior numbers. The Calorian fleet surged forward. 200 warships against 40. And for a moment, it seemed like the battle would be over before it truly began then. The humans showed the galaxy what they were capable of. Admiral Dawson gave a single command, and the human fleet scattered into smaller groups, each one targeting specific enemy vessels with surgical precision. They had studied Calorian tactics, analyzed their weaknesses, prepared for this moment with the obsessive focus of a species that had been planning vengeance for 3 months. Human ships flew directly into the heart of the enemy formation, firing constantly, ignoring damage that would have forced other species to retreat. When one human vessel was crippled, its crew rammed it into the nearest enemy ship rather than surrender. They are insane, Vethris whispered from his position on the Calorian flagship, watching human ships sacrifice themselves without hesitation. No, Drenth replied, finally understanding. They are exactly what the mad veteran warned us about. The battle raged for hours. Human loss is mounting, but Calorian loss is mounting faster every time a human ship was destroyed. Its crew took at least 2 enemy vessels with them, sometimes 3, sometimes more boarding. Parties of human soldiers fought their way onto Calorian ships and battled through corridors with the same ferocity their civilian brothers and sisters had shown on the Horizon's Dream. They gave no quarter because they expected none. And they fought until their last breath because surrender had never been an option. Admiral Dawson commanded from the center of the chaos, his flagship absorbing punishment that would have destroyed any other vessel. His crew performing miracles of damage control to keep the ship fighting. Admiral, his tactical officer, reported with something like awe in her voice. The enemy fleet is breaking. They are trying to retreat. Dawson watched the Calorian warships turn and flee, abandoning their counselor to face human justice alone. Pursue them. Do not let a single enemy vessel escape. And find me Counselor Drenth. The final phase of the battle was more a hunt than a fight. Human ships ran down fleeing Calorian vessels and destroyed them one by one, showing the same mercy that had been shown to the Horizon's Dream. Drenth flagship was surrounded and disabled by concentrated fire from 6 human warships when the counselor tried to escape in a shuttle. It was captured by a human boarding team, and he was dragged onto the Laura Bennett in chains. They brought him to the bridge, where Admiral Dawson waited with the recordings from the Horizon's Dream playing on every screen. 3,000 people, Dawson said quietly, not looking at his prisoner. Families, children. They asked for help. And you murdered them. Drenth tried to speak, to defend himself, to beg for the mercy he had never shown. But Dawson raised his hand for silence. You will be taken to Earth and tried for crimes against humanity. The galaxy will watch as justice is delivered. And every species that ever thought of humans as primitive will remember this day. At the Galactic Council, representatives watched the battle recordings in stunned silence. 40 human ships had destroyed a fleet of 200, accepting casualties that would have broken any other species. Fighting with a fury that defied comprehension, Curve watched from the gallery, too old and tired to feel triumph. Only relief that his warning had finally been proven true when the council called him to speak one final time. He walked slowly to the podium and looked out at the gathered representatives of 1,000 worlds. I told you the truth 40 cycles ago, he said quietly. And now you have seen it with your own eyes. Humans are not like us. They never were. He gestured toward the screen, still showing the aftermath of the battle. They do not fight for territory or resources. They fight for each other. Hurt one of them, and you face all of them. Kill their children, and they will burn your worlds and call it justice. His voice grew heavy with the weight of experience and loss. They call it family, they call it love, and they will never stop. Never surrender, never break, as long as a single one of them still breathes. He turned to leave the chamber for the last time, pausing at the door to deliver his final words to a galaxy that had finally learned to listen. Remember this day. Remember the Horizon's Dream. Remember what happens when you wake the sleeping giant and never, ever give humans a reason to come for you. The council remembered. The galaxy remembered. And humanity took its place among the stars. Not as the primitives everyone had dismissed, but as the species no one would ever threaten again in the years that followed. Monuments were built to the crew of the Horizon's Dream, Laura Bennett, Henry Cole, Sophie Grant, and 3,000 others who had shown the galaxy what humans become when they are left with no choice but war there. Names were carved in stone on 100 worlds, and their story was told to children of every species as a warning and a promise. This is what humans are. This is what humans do. And this is why you should never mistake their kindness for weakness. their patience for cowardice, or their mercy for surrender, for when mercy ends, vengeance begins, and human vengeance is a force that even the stars learn to fear.